as we get into today's episode, the episode, I didn't really mention what the episode was going to be about in the intro. Obviously, wanted to give a shout out to Jeff Baker over at TTM Cast. What we're going to be talking about on today's podcast is that, so Filth Bomb Breaks, who I've worked with those guys, I mean, phenomenal guys. I met a lot of them at the National. Again, like I said, phenomenal guys. I met them. They pulled the Ohtani Babe Ruth cut autograph that was coming out of Definitive. And the card, and I meant to actually talk about this a while ago when the card was pulled. It's one of the, I guess, I don't know if Topps has a name for it, but it's like the white glove service. Like, I know that they were doing that for some of the one-of-one patch cards, the debut rookie patch cards. They were doing redemptions that looked like the cards rather than doing the actual cards in the pack, so that way they could make sure they could send out the cards as safely as possible. So that way, I don't know if you want to get them graded, or they would just be in the best shape possible. So, Filth Bomb Breaks, they pulled the one of their, because there's two one-of-one Ohtani Babe Ruths. They did one of both players batting and then one of both players pitching. So, over the weekend it came out that Filth Bomb Breaks actually purchased the card back. So, because the card was an Angels and a Yankees, technically it belonged to two different owners. It belonged to two different people who bought into the break, and each of the people that bought into the break, they spent $75 on the break at the time, and they agreed to split a $100,000 basically buyout, $50,000 a piece for this card, which, if you're buying into a $750 break, you're gambling in a sense, I would say. Like, obviously, I've talked about on this show breaking and the gambling aspect of it. And if you're spending that, even honestly, if you're spending $20 or $30, you're just really gambling if you're doing breaking, like even if you're just buying a box. But so they split it, and each of them got $50,000. I mean, this is also, I guess this is maybe maybe it's a shout out, maybe it's a reminder. Just make sure you're keeping track of all the stuff that you do for taxes. Like, I don't necessarily have I don't have all the information on taxes. I know that on Bench Clear Media the past couple of years, they've done a pretty good job at like discussing taxes, and my suggestion is to just track everything that you got and talk to a CPA. I mean, if you made $50,000 or you made whatever, $49,250 or whatever on one card, like, just go talk to a CPA. Like, you've got the money to talk to a CPA. And my suggestion in general with taxes is just save like 50%. 50% of the money that you made on a card, which, granted, like I said, you talk to a CPA, they'll be able to give you the more information, because I'm sure there's a way you can deduct the cost of the card, which that will help your tax burden at the end of the year. If this is a side hustle, there's obviously tons of different things that you need to kind of keep track of, and a professional will give you that information. So that's just my reminder. Talk to a tax professional, especially if you're pulling a card and you get a crazy pull, or you're making like a ton of sales. Talk to a professional about the taxes. Just make sure, don't try and skate your way through. Even if you really only made like a couple $1,000s, I think it's definitely worth looking into it, because down the road, who knows what could happen. But yeah, so this card it was one of the one-of-ones for this Babe Ruth card. I think it's a cool card. I think, obviously, there being two of them, I think it was cool that they decided to do two different versions, like a hitter and a pitcher version of the card. I'm wondering what exactly took as long as it did for them to come out with the card. I mean, I don't know if it was like Fanatics was trying to buy some Babe Ruth cut autographs, or if they were waiting for Ohtani to go into free agency for them to come out with that product, because there was also some news over this past weekend of the card, or of Ohtani is going to be making his decision. Oh, also one other thing that I want to mention. So I'm recording this podcast around like 11:30 on Sunday night. So there is another Babe Ruth card, actually, and I should have probably mentioned this at the beginning of the show. Maybe if you're listening to this now, maybe you'll hear a reminder at the beginning of the show. I'm recording this. The Babe Ruth card has not sold yet. There was like some crazy Babe Ruth card. So on tomorrow's show, I'm going to talk about that card. But so this Babe Ruth, Ohtani, the Filth Bomb breaks, they bought it back, which, I mean, that's probably like best case scenario, because it's like, and this is maybe one of the issues with not issues, but this is an issue that can happen with breaking, is like when the biggest card, and I'm wondering if Topps will ever change this kind of thing. Like, I'm wondering if they'll change this sort of thing in the future, where it's like, there's two teams. Like, it feels like Topps has catered a little bit to breaking, and sports cards just in general has catered to breaking. So, like, the fact that there's two teams on this card, like, I don't know how you really fix it necessarily. Like, I don't know what you're going to have to do. Like, if you make it, because you obviously want Babe Ruth in the Yankees uniform. Like, you don't want Babe Ruth to be in a, like, in just like a gray uniform and just be any team. But also at the same time, it's like, by coming out with this card, essentially you're coming out with a card where if, and especially in a product like Definitive, like, I would say, I don't know, I mean, maybe probably like half of the Definitive product is probably opened by breakers, realistically. Like, I don't know how, I would be surprised, because it's like an expensive product, so it's like, I don't know, this is a statistic that I don't know how you'd be able to prove or say or do or whatever, but like, I would be interested to know how much of this product was opened by breakers versus how much of this product was opened by someone just buying a box of it. And actually, now that I'm thinking about it, now that I'm saying that out loud, I bet you it's more like 75 to 80% of this product is opened by breakers, because like, it's just not realistic, really. It's just not realistic for someone to pay for a box of this product. Like, sure, maybe they get this Babe Ruth card, or maybe they pull some like really good rookie or something like that, but it's like, it really is almost hard to justify, like, unless you're like a high roller, sure, whatever, but like, if you're a high roller and you're buying this type of product, like, maybe you're the type of person that you're not even really selling the cards like that. And I think an interesting little wrinkle to this situation, where the product is being opened by people who like aren't selling the cards, because like, they just have the money to open the product and they don't really need to sell the card. Like, so it is good to see that, the card is kind of coming out on social media. And again, I've talked about this on social media. It's cool nowadays that we get to see these cards and we actually get to really see that they exist. And I was on Hobby Hotline. I think I was hosting a couple weeks ago, and I was talking to Mike from Junk Wax Hero, and he was like, this is just a card that exists on social media, and it's not one that you'll ever see, really. Like, there's an interesting what's the word, dynamic there with like cards that are just, they're on social media, but it's like, you'll never really see them in person, or they'll never be able to be part of a collection. I think that's kind of an interesting piece to this as well. Like, especially now that, this card, I guess, in theory, will be seen somewhere. I mean, I don't know what Filth Bomb breaks are going to be doing with the card, but they bought it, and they are going to, they'll have the card, so it's like a card that people will potentially see, maybe. I mean, I don't know if they bring it places, or if they have like some sort of display, or if they have like a store where they maybe put it in. I don't know what they're going to do with it, but the card has been pulled, and Filth Bomb Breaks bought the card back from those people for $100,000. So late Sunday night, because there was a bunch of extended bidding, I guess with Robert Edward Auctions, if any bids are put in on some of the top auctions, it goes to extended bidding, which means an extra 15 minutes gets added to all the items. So, like, if you listen to last night's episode, the auction just wasn't done yet, but it was 11:30, and I'm like, I'll do a full episode on this the next day, because there was some news I talked about on the podcast yesterday. But like I said, so the card sold ended up being for $7.2 million, and it's now the third most expensive sports card, behind the 1952 Mickey Mantle that I believe was in an SGC 9.5, and a T206 Honus Wagner that sold for $7.25 million. So it was, I guess that would be 50 grand, I think. 50, it would be just about 50 grand less than that Honus Wagner card. And I have a few different thoughts on the card. One being obviously phenomenal that, we still have cards that are selling in the industry. We have pieces of our industry, things in our industry that are selling for $7 million. that's obviously phenomenal news. That is, some people thought that it was going to be the most expensive sports card of all time, and that's kind of my other thought about it. But I do want to talk about that. I don't necessarily think this is a how do I want to say this? I don't think this is a catalyst for the industry to see any type of significant bump the way that when the Mike Trout or, any of these early cards, probably back in 2020, 2021, so it's probably at that point. And at that point, some of these high, crazy value cards were, or maybe you could even say one of the PSA 9 Mickey Mantles that sold for, I believe it was $5.2 million, I think. Those I felt were catalysts for the market, for people to kind of, come back into the market and hopefully increase some of the prices of certain cards. I really don't think that this is one of those cards that's going to do it. I think it's interesting that it's sort of a card that hasn't really been on the radar necessarily. I mean, a lot of the top cards, if you look at them, it's a lot of Mickey Mantles, it's a lot of, T206 Honus Wagners, it's that Mike Trout card that's in that list that sold a couple years ago. It's a lot of those types of cards, so it's good to see, a card that I feel like maybe wasn't on people's radar jump into the conversation. Now, that's the positives. I think, and I don't know. I don't necessarily think that these things are negatives, but like I talked about on, it was a couple weeks ago when this card was really getting announced. I was seeing all the headlines. And this is the part that I don't necessarily like. And I'm almost positive I talked about it on the podcast, and I said, where did these numbers come from? Who is the one that is promoting that this number is going to sell for over because all the headlines of all these mainstream media outlets that aren't even sports card outlets, they were some of the sports card, news breaking people, but then there was mainstream outlets. I think there was a Washington Post article. There was I think I saw a New York Post article. There were multiple different articles written with basically the same headline. Basically, they were all saying that this was going to be the most expensive sports card of all time. This was going to be over $12 million because the 12.5 is what that Mickey Mantle sold for, I believe, back in 2022. Every article, everybody was talking about it. So this is I think it opens up an interesting conversation, in my opinion, for how much promotion of sports cards should be allowed, I guess. But I don't know. I think it's a thin line between promotion of this card and trying to pump up the card and the price of the card. And I think actually it's potentially a good thing that this card didn't break the record, because maybe it is setting some sort of precedent that people that are looking to buy these cards aren't going to buy the card for a certain price because people are telling them to. I think probably back in a couple years ago, honestly, 2020, 2021, if an article was written like that about a certain card, I'm almost positive that the card would have sold for that record amount. We are just in a different time and a different era within the market. I think the market has gotten a lot smarter when it comes to these things. Like I said, I work in marketing. I have maybe more of a spidey sense when it comes to, I see something and I'm like, this seems weird. For example, there's this random, but it's just the Snoop Dogg thing. When Snoop Dogg, they came out with that information, Snoop Dogg was going to stop smoking. Literally within 30 seconds, I was like, this is a marketing campaign. This is not, because everybody was just running with this headline. Snoop Dogg says that he's going to stop smoking. And then a week later, it comes out that he's doing an advertisement for a smokeless grill. And it's this, it was the most obvious in my head. When I looked at it, it was the most obvious marketing campaign of all time. So it's when non-sports card publications are talking about a sports card breaking the record, in my mind, there's obviously some sort of marketing campaign going on here. And I think even on that podcast where I talked about that a little bit, I was wondering where this card would end, and if this card Like, how much money was sort of spent on this marketing campaign, and like where, if that really affected the price. Like, I don't really know. Like, I mean, all the articles were saying that it was going to sell for $12 million. So if this card sells for $12 million, I would imagine that whatever they spent on the marketing campaign probably would have been worth it. Now, who is evaluating this? Who is the person? Where did the campaign come from? Who set this up? Who did this? This is sort of the point that I want to try and, I don't know where or who the original source was, or who was the one that came out with these articles, or who was the one that was telling people to write these articles, because it was clear that, and here's like maybe a little bit of behind the scenes from a marketing thing. Like, the majority of articles about random things on like the Washington Post and these other media publications, they're just purchased. Like, you can just buy an article and you can just buy a spot in there and you can get a headline by purchasing it. Like, yes, they're obviously writing organic articles as well, but like, other than advertising, I would say a significant portion of the revenue that these media companies are bringing in are like people that are paying for articles. So it's like, it's like when you see like some fake guru, or you see some person selling like a marketing course, or you see some person who's like this mogul standing in front of private jets and all these watches and all these cars. It's like when you see that they have an article in Forbes, or you see they have an article in or like Yahoo News or something like that. And all you have to do is really look into it and say, most of the articles do say this. They say this was a paid promotion. I don't know I forget off the top of my head if the article said that for this, but if I had to guess, I would say that there probably was a pretty good chance that this was a paid marketing campaign. So like I said, let me get back to this other point. So like, if the card sold for $12 million, then yes, the marketing, whatever money they spent on the marketing campaign, I'm sure was worth the money. But like, it sold for $5 million less. It almost sold for less than half of what these articles were saying that they were going to sell for. So like I said, it's a good thing. I think that the market has gotten a lot smarter when it comes to things like that, and smarter in the sense that like, they're not just going to fall for these media outlets saying it should sell for this much, and then it does, and then it did because people said that it should. It sold for what it sold because the market is always going to be the market. And like, if the card, if maybe it's actually a $3 million worth $3 million, like, did the marketing campaign boost it $4 million and like that doubled it, and they were kind of looking at it. Like I said, I just don't know where the money, how much they purchased some of those articles for, or what they did, but it really is, it's something that is a good thing that I think it's good for two reasons. It's good because the card sold for $7 million. That's obviously phenomenal, but it's also good that I think the market has evolved and matured a little bit to the point where you can't just tell the market what the card is worth. The market is going to determine what the card is worth, not someone telling you what it's worth. And I think we've seen that. I don't know. I think there was a trend probably, in the sports card industry within cards. And I mean, I definitely did this, where I was like, this card I think could be this price, like, and giving sort of, market projections, which, I don't know. Looking back on it, I think I was a little naive, honestly. Like, and I think it was easy content to make because you could really just throw a rock. It almost was like throwing a rock into the Grand Canyon, and or shooting fish in a barrel, I think is the other phrase for it. Like, you really could say any card was going to go up, and it would. So I think, like I said, the market has matured, and because people are saying that a card is worth a certain amount, the market is what is actually going to determine what that card is worth, which I think is actually a really good thing because of sort of what has happened to the market and how it's matured over these past few years. So it's not necessarily new data, I suppose, but Sports Card Investor put out some data from GemRate that I thought was very interesting. And obviously GemRate, one of the sponsors, or one of the, our partners here on this show, we're trying to figure out a way to get that data more on the homepage for sure. Like, because GemRate, they put out phenomenal, grading data. And I think grading in this day and age is one of the more important parts of sports cards. So here we go. Here are the numbers. So we're going to start from the bottom. We'll go 10, Mike Trout at 330K. Number 9, Luka Doncic at 339K. Shohei Ohtani at 360K. Derek Jeter at 367K. John Morant at $370K, Zion Williamson at $386K, Kobe Bryant at $518K, LeBron James at $593K, Ken Griffey Jr. at $672K, and then Michael Jordan has a whopping 1.2 million cards graded by PSA, which I think is actually pretty wild. I mean, basically double the amount that Ken Griffey Jr. has. And I think with players like, the Luka Doncic, Shohei Ohtani, John Morant, Zion Williamson, I think those players having that many graded cards, I mean, especially now that looking at Zion Williamson, he's really it's wild that we're going to see him be on this list forever, probably, because I can't imagine he ever drops out of the top 10. I mean, he's number 5 right now, but I can't imagine I can't imagine we'll ever see an era within sports cards where a player like Zion Williamson comes onto the scene where grading is still, I think now it's we're two prices that are very similar to what they were back then, but the prevalence of grading and the craziness that was kind of going on around sports cards and modern sports cards. And I mean, even same with John Morant. I think John Morant obviously is good, but I think, he had been having a little bit of issues off and on the court with some injuries, off the court with some of the, weapon stuff that he's been kind of doing, which, whatever. But the craze, and I think you could even put Shohei Ohtani and Luka Doncic, honestly, in this conversation as well, just because the 2018, 2019, 2020 players, I would be surprised, no, if they had not shut down grading for a significant portion of time, I bet you a player like LaMelo Ball would probably be on this list. I wouldn't be surprised if he's somewhere farther down on this list, but as some people remember, I mean, it's probably going to be I almost think that I think that they should make some sort of, I think that there could be a movie made about that era of sports cards, and not in a similar way, but when I think of that era, I think of when the LaMelo Ball Prism cards were just about to come out, they literally were just yeah, we're not grading any more cards. That was they cut it off right around that time. And it's just so crazy to think back to that time period and how, prevalent grading was and how, the backlog I think is interesting, and it's something that I haven't actually seen a lot of people talk about recently. I do wonder if they've 100% caught up. I would have to imagine they're 100% caught up on any type of backlog that they have, because they must be 100% caught up, because I got stuff graded at the National, and I did the bulk order, and it came back in as much time as they said that it was going to, and for even some bulk submissions when you were doing them, it would take 6 or 7 or 8 months for some of these. And I know some people that had over a year on their orders to come back, which granted, I think some people, if you got them graded through group submitters, a year, that could have also been when you sent them to the group rate, or when you sent them to the group submitter, when the group submitter got them submitted, and it's a year from when they actually process the orders. So with that backlog, it was such a crazy time that I almost picture it that scene from The Wolf of Wall Street when Leonardo DiCaprio goes onto the trading floor, and it's the Black Monday or whatever it was in the stock market, and they're just sitting there, and everyone's freaking out, and they're just sitting there oh my god, and the bell is ringing or whatever. I imagine almost that was a day when it came to at the PSA office when they were just yeah, we're stopping, we're not doing any more submissions. I almost picture it similar to that, where I don't know, maybe that, now that I'm saying the example out loud, maybe it's not as good, but I think you probably see sort of the point that I'm trying to get at here with the stopping of submissions and sort of the wildness that went on during that time period. And as much as I at the time was this isn't really that big of a deal, everybody getting cards graded, it's whatever, it's not that big of a deal, I still don't necessarily think it's that big of a deal, I guess. I mean, I think that I think people I think they exaggerated a little bit when they were kind of how mad they were at the time about how much people were getting stuff graded. I don't really think it's that much of a big deal. If you want to get stuff graded, fine, go get it graded. Because now you're seeing SGC's doing a $9 deal, I think, with SGC's doing a $9 deal. I think with Topps, like if you get Bowman basketball or Bowman football grade, they're doing $9. And I think like the submission was like a 10 or 50, like a 7 or 10 day submission. You can do all this stuff and you get the cards graded and all that. But like, and PSA I think has gotten a lot better. I mean, if you're doing a bulk submission, you probably could get those back in like 2 or 3 months, like not really too bad. I mean, if you're getting a bunch of stuff graded, if you're going to get them graded in person, like I said, I don't know. It's also wild that Michael Jordan is almost double Ken Griffey Jr. because like Ken Griffey Jr. has like if you look at the most graded cards, like specific cards, Ken Griffey Jr. I think in the top 10 has like 6 or like 5 or 6 specific cards that are like I know the Topps traded PSA 10 is like has almost like 40,000. Like I know the PSA 9 or maybe not 40. I think it has like I forget off the top of my head, but I know that's like number one, and then the PSA 9 is like number 2, and then like the upper deck card I know is in that list. Like even just the regular Topps card I know is on that list too. I mean, it's really wild like how many different cards Ken Griffey Jr. has in the top list. But then with Zion Williamson, you know, he's in that top list as well, and he really has like he's in this top graded list. And I think it's just interesting, like the different cards that are graded by so many different, like by PSA. Like I said, Ken Griffey Jr. has like a majority of his like rookie cards are graded, where Zion Williamson really like the Prism card is like the number one card that's graded by PSA, like a PSA 10 and a PSA 9. I believe they're probably both in the top 15 of total graded. But other than that, I mean, those are like the big ones. And then, like I said, Ken Griffey Jr. But then you look at like Michael Jordan, and his cards are really not like, there aren't like a ton of them on this list. Like obviously the 19, his Fleer rookie is going to be high up there, but it's not like if you look at that card compared to the rest of his cards throughout his career and the rest of the cards of players on that list, like it's not really that high. Like if you look at it, to be honest, like even the PSA 10, there isn't really that many of them compared to, like I said, the Ken Griffey Jr. or the Ken Griffey, any of the Ken Griffey Jr. cards, or like the Zion Williamson Prism, or like the Ja Prism, or I mean even the Luka Prism. I think I just look at that, and, you know, the other thing that I look at, too, is I say, look at how many cards were graded of those players. Like, this is a statistic that I know I'll never end up getting, but I really would love to know at some point, is, like, what is the percentage of cards that aren't graded? Like, how many Zion cards are there out there that just aren't graded? Like, if he has, like, if he has over 386,000 cards graded by PSA, like how many cards aren't graded? Like, is that 5%? Is that like 10%? Like, is that 1%? Because I mean, I just don't even know what that number could be. And I mean, same with Luka. I mean, like I wonder, you know, his print runs were probably a little bit lower than Zion's, but like they were still creeping up there. Like if you look at total PSA Prism graded cards, like if you look at those numbers, you're going to see like the jump from Tatum's year in 2017 to Luka's year in 2018 is like a pretty significant jump, it's crazy that happened. And then also sort of the craze of sports cards kind of followed that. And like people kind of looked at that card as sort of like the card to buy. But like if you look at like I said, the Tatum, there is only a portional percentage of that card that's ever graded, or that was graded, the Prism card compared to the Luka card. So I just think looking at these numbers overall, you know, I'll be interested in 10 years if we ever see how much we see this list really change. Like, because I think we did see the perfect storm of like popularity within sports cards, popularity within specific players. And then obviously, you know, with the pandemic, I mean, Zion really had like the perfect storm of like, you know, being that number one prospect and then going into the NBA and then getting injured kind of early on in his career and then coming in and playing really well and having the super hyped card. And then the pandemic happened and they stopped playing. So, like, then you have the whole summer of people just being like, oh, Zion, I can't wait to see Zion getting back out there. And then people are just getting all of his cards and they're sending him grading. So it was like that 2019 year, I think, is going to be a very interesting year when we look back on in sports cards, because like I don't know, I wouldn't be surprised if a player like Kobe White is in the top 20. Like the 2019 year, I think is just going to be such an interesting year to look back on in sports cards, and it's really going to be one that I don't even think we know the full extent to how many of these cards were really produced. You know, and maybe we'll get the percentage, maybe we'll find out eventually what the print runs are, but I'm not holding my breath. But like, like I said, I think that there is a significant portion of these cards that were sent to PSA, and clearly those are coming through kind of with these grading numbers. So I definitely suggest going to check out this podcast. I think it was last Wednesday. Bill Simmons has his podcast on The Ringer. I believe he does have timestamps in the episodes, but I think the interview with Michael Rubin starts at around 54 minutes. He's a long podcast, so 54 minutes is when the Michael Rubin podcast starts. I would definitely, I don't know. I listened to it. I thought it was really interesting. This was actually a clip that was pulled from somebody on TikTok. It was Rip and Wax, who is somebody that who I've known for a while. I met him at the National a couple times. He posted this clip originally on TikTok. I did speed the clip up to like 1.5 speed, just so that way we could get the whole clip in. But I'm going to play the clip right now, and then after the clip, I'm going to tell you some of my thoughts about it.
Yeah, one of the things now, and it's not with you guys necessarily, but just like these box breaks, it's a whole thing now about did they fake that one? Oh, how did that person end up with the card in this box? And
here's what I'm going to tell you.
So how do you fix that?
So let me give you a great
feel
example.
good about it.
So first of all, breaking is a big part of the collectibles industry. If a collector doesn't,
a big part of Fanatics Live.
Correct. And if a collector doesn't like that, then they're just not being realistic, because you say there are 3 distribution points for primary cards, right? Breakers, hobby shops, and retailers like a Walmart or a Target. That's been, and before it was hobby shops and the retailers, it wasn't the breakers. The breakers now have a important, and by the way, it's great marketing. So for us, we understand the math of you take like a big breaker and one guy's doing 15% of the business, they're going to get 15% of the cards. So what we did, people always question the integrity of what we do. So this year for the first time, we said, hey, let's take our auditor. I think we hired Deloitte & Touche, and it wasn't Deloitte & Touche. One of the we're going to hire you. I think it is Deloitte & Touche. We're going to hire you. We're going to pay you to audit all the results the same way the NBA audits their draft lottery.
That's cool.
And we did that this year. Okay. Now we haven't really broadcasted, but we started doing that this past year. We now have Deloitte & Touche coming in, auditing everything to make sure that everything is random as it's advertised. So that was a great thing for us to do. We just added a cost for the authenticity of the hobby. Does everyone know we did that? No. Did we make a big deal out of it? No. But it's important to do things like that. Absolutely. I always say, anytime someone has it right, we should listen to it, figure out whether they're right or wrong. If they're right, we should act on it. If they're wrong, we should still hear their perspective.
I think that there's I have 2 main takeaways from that clip. I think one is that they have clearly included breakers. Obviously, I think it's pretty obvious, like especially because with Fanatics Live, they've clearly included breakers in the 3 ways of, he talked about the 3 ways of distribution. You got hobby shops, you got retail shops, and then now you have, they're including breakers in that conversation now. And I think that seems fairly obvious to me, if I'm going to be honest. Like, we've seen breakers become more and more popular, and I think it's just a different way for people to enjoy sports cards. And I get that for most collectors or people who are in the hobby, maybe they don't like breaking because, I don't know. I think it maybe there are maybe some negatives. Maybe it has drawn up the price of some certain boxes, but overall, like, I just don't see the price of boxes for certain products. I think is pretty high, and I think pretty unrealistic for what you're actually getting in the box. And I would like to see that price come down, to be honest. But like at this point in the sports card industry, like I find it pretty hard to argue that like pricing of sports cards is really like, especially at this point. Like if we were talking a couple years ago, maybe we could make the argument that everything was overpriced. I think you can find cards nowadays, and I understand that whatever, you can't find some of the big products, but you could find any Topps flagship. I mean, with Panini, with basketball and football, you can find basically any product now. So I don't think that's necessarily like, I don't think you can make the argument that those cards are too expensive nowadays. Like you can find top players in their PSA 10s for most sports, and I don't think breaking necessarily has anything to do with that. With the pricing of singles, but like you can find boxes of any football or basketball product for retail price nowadays. I mean, realistically, like if you want to buy them online, sure, you might have to pay a little bit of a premium, but like that's the price of if you're trying to buy the stuff online. I think, and that's just, I'd use the term, that's the price of doing business. And that's sort of what I think it is. And sometimes like, that's the price of doing business within sports cards. I understand if you're looking at this from, I don't know, a hobby shop's perspective, maybe they don't have the same, or you're looking at somebody who has, made their living in sports cards. Things change, and that's kind of the other thing with this industry is like it's constantly changing, which some people may not like that. I think it is good for people who enjoy doing business and all these types of things, but the other very interesting piece was that Fanatics hired they hired an auditing agency, which I believe is just the agency that they use to audit probably everything within their business. Now, I did think the one funny part that Michael Rubin said on there was like, he said that they did this, and he goes, oh, but have we promoted it? Have we talked about it? No, not really. And it's like, well, dude, you're talking about it on like one of the biggest podcasts, one of the biggest sports podcasts in the world. So I think at this point, I would imagine there's probably going to be more people talking about it, and I don't know, Fanatics will probably never come out with these numbers, so it's like, what is the point of talking about it at all if they're not going to come out with the audited statistics? Because it's like, if the audited statistics are for Fanatics to look at, then what is the point? I mean, I realistically, this audit is probably... when I originally heard this clip, what first came to my mind was that the only reason they would audit the business is if they're trying to get investors, and the investors are skeptical that they're giving boxes away to big influencers and all these types of things. That's really one of the only reasons I can think of. I'm sure there are other reasons you could probably think of why they would do audits and why they would want to do it. I mean, as a sports card fan, like, the audits are something I've been wanting to see for a while, but like I said, if it's not something I feel like they're going to come out with, like, I don't know what, they said they hired auditors to make sure everything is above board, and it's like, but what is being audited? Like, we're never going to see these numbers, so it's like, again, what's really the point of even saying it at all, I guess? I mean, I get, I see that, I understand that you're answering Bill Simmons' question there when he asks about influencers and people getting boxes, and it's like, all you really have to say is, no, we're not doing that. Like, to come out and say that there's an audit going on, it almost makes me a little bit like, it seems like there's a red flag. It seems like there's like a little bit of an alarm bell going off in my head. Like, why is the company doing an audit on themselves? Like, why isn't it just a no, that's not happening, we aren't giving out? Like, why do we have to bring up an audit? And I think in the interview he probably does allude to that's not going on, but at the same time, it's like the fact that they're bringing in an auditor to make sure this isn't happening does make me a little bit, like I said, it brings up some red flags in my opinion of, like, is somebody who is in control of this? Like, this is sort of where I think the audit is going to be good. It's like, who is in control of this going on? Like, who's in control of the distribution? Like, who, it's obviously not Michael Rubin. It's obviously, a group, the distribution, like I've said in the past, it's like the different departments within Topps nowadays. There are just different departments that do different things. So, at Topps maybe a couple years ago, the baseball was like one department, or like, whatever, other sports was one department, and maybe you had like one or two departments in there. But now it's like you have, each sport has their own specific distribution department, marketing department, design department, merchandising department, all these types of departments that they have within Topps and Fanatics, I think they're just a lot larger, and I think it is definitely a good... I'm glad that they're doing this audit. I don't know necessarily who it benefits, I guess, because I don't think they're going to come out with any of these statistics, especially if, like, I don't know, if something weird is going on, like, if this audit comes out and something, who knows, like, maybe somebody was doing that, like, who, I would want Panini to do this audit more than Topps and Fanatics, because I think we've seen more controversy with Panini doing this over the past few years than we have with Topps and Fanatics. But I think those were my main two takeaways from that clip. Like I said, I think it was last Wednesday when the podcast came out. Definitely something you should go check out if you're into, if you like listening to Michael Rubin talk. I mean, I know some people maybe they don't at this point, because he does do a ton of interviews, but it was a good, like, long form interview where he went in depth on a lot of topics. It's on, on all the podcast platforms, all these types of things. So definitely go check it out. I thought it was a good interview, and I definitely suggest going to check it out. Nat Turner put out a post, and he said, so far in 2023, they have authenticated and graded 1,600 1986 Fleer Michael Jordan rookie cards. On top of that, they have failed 447 additional copies or he said we failed additional that number as copy or fake or counterfeit. So year to date, 2,500 or 2,051 copies of the Michael Jordan rookie have come in, and 21% have been fake. Which, I guess one thing that I would also want to get some data on is like some modern cards potentially. Like, I would be interested at a percentage of how many modern cards have been sent in and been faked. I would have to say, I don't know. I mean, you know, that 1986 Fleer Jordan card is obviously one of the more notorious cards within all of the industry, and it's from an era where I don't think those cards are very hard to counterfeit. And so the fact that PSA has caught 21% of the Jordan cards this year alone, 400 copies this year alone, which is like, that seems like a pretty astronomical number if you really think about it, considering like how prominent that card is. Like, the fact that they have turned away almost 500 copies this year is a number that's really hard, a little bit, in my opinion, it's a little bit hard to grasp. And it's like, it almost doesn't seem plausible that something like this could happen. Obviously, I'm not saying Nat Turner's a liar. I definitely think it happened, but it's just like, if I don't even know like where to even really go from here. Like, you know, that Fleer Jordan card is so notorious that the fact that somebody could think that they would be able to counterfeit it, like, I mean, you know, the pricing of those cards obviously has dropped pretty significantly, like for the PSA 10, PSA 9. So if you are spending however much you're spending to, well, you know what I guess I'd be interested in to know is, like, of those 447 cards, like, where are these cards coming from? Are they coming from? They're definitely not coming from 447 different people. So, like, at what point? I don't think Nat Turner in the thread at all talks about like how many of these cards came from multiple different sources. But it's like, there has to have been multiple fakes that were submitted by the same person. And at that point, like, what do you do? Like, do you ban that person from grading? Like, it really, grading has become such an important part of the industry that I don't know. I don't know what you would really do here. This is, like I said, it's such an odd number for someone to obviously, if they get them through, like, and that kind of goes to my other question that I maybe have is, like, how many versions, like, are fake and made it through? Like, how many versions have been graded that were faked and made it through? Like, is there a way? I don't know. It's such a tough topic because it's like, counterfeiting, I think, within the modern sports card industry isn't as prevalent, I would imagine, from modern cards. Obviously, from these 1986 Fleer and, you know, probably like the Gretzky rookie, any of the cards from like the 70s and 80s, you're probably going to look at some pretty high percentages of those cards trying to be submitted that are fakes. And it's good, like I said, it's good that PSA has smoked those cards out and been able to, you know, stop 400 of them from being graded potentially. Like, I don't know. It's just such a tough topic to really go through and to say, like, what does PSA need to do? Like, because again, you know, PSA, if let's say, like, and this is a hypothetical, and you know, I guess I'm I don't love hypotheticals, I suppose, like in this type of circumstance, like hypotheticals, and I do like coming up with hypotheticals, but I don't like a hypothetical where it's like you're creating like a fake person, like a straw man argument. But it's like, what if you have like a prevalent card submitter and they're submitting a lot of fake cards? Like, do you ban them from submitting cards? Like, or do you have to say like, hey, like this is what's going on with your card submissions, like what's going on, like where, like what's the level of investigation they're doing on these fake cards and where they're coming from is maybe my next question, which if you're PSA, that's not necessarily your job, but at the same time, if one person submitted 5 cards and they all came back as fake, or if one person is submitting 5 or a multiple of different cards, and you've got a couple fakes in there or counterfeit, like, do you have to have the conversation with the person, be like, hey, what's going on here? Like, where did you get these? Like, at what? Obviously, I don't think PSA. I feel like PSA probably can't do that, but maybe it's something that they should look into. Like, should PSA be trying to investigate these fakes and counterfeits? I guess maybe that's ultimately the point that I want to ask the question to the audience and think about is like, is this something for PSA to look at and say, well, we need to figure out where these fakes are coming from? If it's multiple cards from the same person, I feel like it's kind of probably pretty easy. If it's I don't know, or if it's like a prevalent group submitter, again, I feel like that's fairly not easy, but it's fairly accessible for you to reach out to that person and be like, hey, where'd you get this card? Like, we're trying to do, because it's fraud. That's what's going on. Like, it's someone is committing, at some point in the process, someone is committing fraud. Now, whether it's the person who bought the card, who created the card, like if they counterfeited it, or if it's the person 2 or 3 links down the chain of like where the card came from, like, I don't know. Like, they need to figure out, I guess, where these cards are coming from, because 20% is like 20% is significant. And again, it's also with this Jordan card, like how many of these cards exist still that haven't been graded is another interesting thing that I would want to know. We probably will never know, but you got to think it's probably pretty high. It's got to be a pretty high percentage. But either way, I mean, you hope that down the road, maybe the counterfeiting, but honestly, the thing is, like, if there's money to be made, someone's going to try and make it. Unfortunately, when it comes to sports cards, in some cases like this one, the money is made by counterfeiting the card and trying to get it graded. And once you get it graded, you're pretty much scot-free, because PSA has become the gold standard of like, this card is authentic, you are all set, you don't have to worry. Especially if you get it graded and it gets graded at all, you're good. Like that you probably made your profit there. So, I guess my thoughts are like, what's the next step for PSA? If they try and do anything to stop these fakes, or if they're just like, well, we just have to be good at catching the fakes and making sure that the cards don't get graded.